Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are back at the Paul Morphy Saga. The first American Chess Congress is finished, and here we have a very interesting game. It's Charles Henry Stanley against Paul Morphy. Charles Henry Stanley is the first official United States champion. He became United States champion in 1845, so 2 years before the happening of the first American Chess Congress. And here Morphy is challenging him to a duel with the odds of a pawn. You can see that Morphy's f7 pawn is missing, which is not a small thing to offer the first official United States champion. And he became, like I said, in 1845. Here we even have a nice image of this when he defeated Eugene Rousseau of New Orleans. So let's just enjoy that for a second. And yeah, it's quite the game. After the first American Chess Congress, Morphy, before returning from New York to his south in New Orleans, he decided to make use of his time and play some more games. He decided to challenge the members of the New York Chess Club, either to a match, Morphy against everyone. Then he, when they declined, then he said, okay, he will maybe challenge them and give them odds of a pawn and the move. And pretty much everyone refused this offer except Charles Henry Stanley. Here he accepted the offer on behalf of the New York Chess Club, and so the match started. The idea behind the match is first to 7 wins, and this is game 5. Not all of the games were saved from this match, and first I didn't think if I was going to show the match or not, but then I saw this game and I thought that we should really show it as well, it just features the most unusual mate. So without further ado, let's check it out. We're not gonna discuss any theory since Morphy's f7 pawn is missing, wouldn't really make sense. So e4 by Charles Henry Stanley. We have d6, d4, Morphy goes knight to f6, attacks the e4 pawn, knight to c3, and now e6. So if Morphy does everything perfectly, for example, bishop here, knight here, let's say he somehow gets the light square bishop into the game and castles, he will be down a pawn, but he will have a semi-open f-file for his rook. So it's not all that terrible. But if, on the other hand, white plays extremely well, then it's just a pawn down. So bishop to d3, white continues development, knight to c6 now, putting pressure on the d4 pawn, and the bishop to e3. Stanley defends it. We have e5 by Morphy, and here comes d5, grabbing more space in the center. We have knight to e7 by Morphy, switching the knight over to g6, and now h3, not allowing the g4 square for Morphy's pieces. We have knight to g6, and now knight c to e2. It's quite an interesting idea, as this knight already came into play, but he wants to move it to make room for the c pawn, as he is expecting Morphy to at some point challenge the center with c6. But maybe some other moves were a bit more, maybe finish development first. But okay, he goes knight c to e2, and now as the g2 pawn is undefended, Morphy immediately goes for it, knight to h4. So the g2 pawn hangs. King to f1 is a fine move, but Stanley decides to defend it with rook to h2, and this is already a weird move. We have bishop to e7 by Morphy, g3, kicking away Morphy's knight, knight to g6, and now f4. So makes sense as you prepared it with g3. E captures on f4 by Morphy. We have knight captures on f4, and now comes knight to e5. Morphy not interested in trading, he just improves the position of his knight. We have knight to f3, and now Morphy just castles. And here there's a general principle in chess that says when you're better material-wise or position-wise, you should trade down, and the more you trade down, the better you will be. However, here it doesn't really do anything for white, but Stanley still goes for it. Knight captures on e5, pawn captures. Now you have to move your knight somewhere. Doesn't really have a lot of good squares. You have g2, e2, and e6, but this will just double your pawns. Double your e pawns. So instead he goes knight to g2, but now Morphy takes this opportunity to attack the white center with c6. And although he's still down a pawn, he definitely has compensation, because white's light square bishop isn't all that great. The knight and rook aren't really doing all that much. The king is still in the center of the board, so Morphy definitely has compensation for the pawn. And here you want to just continue developing. You want to ignore this c6 move. You have to admit that you have to give back the pawn, nothing to be done there. play queen e2, castle queenside maybe, and hopefully take the game from there. However, he wanted to defend everything. He played c4, but this just will not do. Here, Morphy finds a very nice refutation. He plays bishop to b4 with check. And okay, now you have to defend. Obviously, you're not going to go to the f-file in front of the rook, so you have to block it. So bishop to d2 was played, but now comes queen to b6 by Morphy. And okay, it doesn't seem all that bad. Again, you can develop maybe the queen and the castle queenside. Perhaps you can still survive this. However, bishop captures on b4 was played. Here, Stanley is hoping for queen captures. You block with the queen, and you're doing okay. You're still up a pawn, and you should do well in the endgame. However, Morphy had something else in mind, so feel free to pause the video and try to find this, well, different idea that Morphy played, while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on not being greedy and going for the bishop. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight captures on e4. And now all hell breaks loose as the knight is hanging, the rook is hanging. But you cannot capture either, because if you capture the knight, then queen to f2 is mate. The rook, of course, defends the queen on f2. But if you capture the rook, then queen to f2 is still mate, because now the knight guards the f2 square. So here Stanley has to figure out what to do here. He goes for knight to f4. He gives back some material to close off the f-file from the rook, and also now the rook guards the f2 square. So he's hoping now for captures the knight, and then maybe he can survive. But Morphy goes, of course, for queen to g1 with check, and now he's just gonna pick up the rook. King e2, we have queen captures on h2, king to e3, and now queen to f2 with check. We have king captures on e4. Morphy sacrifices the knight. And now, this is basically the reason why I'm showing you this game. Feel free to pause the video and try to find a win for Morphy. It's actually a forced mate in 5, so, you know, have at it while I give you a couple of seconds. So, for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on this spectacular mate in 5. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's rook captures on f4 with check. Point being, if you capture the rook, queen captures is mate. And if you don't capture the rook, then the king has to start his march up the board, and then it's a king hand. Queen checks, king has to go up the board, you check, up the board, check, up the board. And now you don't have rook to f8 mate, but now comes the unusual mate we were talking about. You just move the bishop and its mate. For example, bishop captures on h3 and its mate, or g4 or f5 for that matter, doesn't really matter, but the rook from a8 actually delivers checkmate. So that's the unusual mate we were talking about. However, the reason why I'm showing you this game is because Morphy didn't go for rook captures on f4. Instead, Morphy went for queen to d4 with check, and probably a case of Morphy just instantly playing like he did against Paulsen. And now he allows king to f3. So now the king wiggles out, and it's unclear how you are continuing the attack. Sure, you can grab the knight, but then you lose the rook, so you don't have infinite material here. So what happens here? Morphy decided first to go for c5. First save the rook, and then you're going to decide what to do here. But the problem is bishop to c3 comes with an attack on the queen. And now the next move is pretty much forced. Rook captures on f4 by Morphy with check, g captures, and now queen captures on f4 with check. King to g2, and now Morphy has no more ways of continuing the attack, so he has to continue to happily sacrifice pieces. Bishop captures on h3. He needs to bring the rook into the game and fast. We have king captures on h3, only good move. If you don't do it, then it's very good for black. So king captures on h3. Now queen to h6 check, king g2, queen g5 check, and here Stanley is reluctant to go to the f-file, not to allow rook to f2, or rook to f8 check. So instead he goes back, king to h2. Here Morphy played queen to h4 with check, and it was in this position on move 29 that they agreed to a draw. Now, it's interesting that a draw was agreed upon because white is actually winning here, but Stanley doesn't want to take his chances against Morphy on an open board with his king taking a walk because this is game 5 and Stanley lost the previous 4 games. And in fact, after this game, Stanley resigned the match. Even though it was first to 7 wins, he said, okay, that's just enough. I lost 4, now okay, I drew 1. but not really proud of this draw. Point is that Stanley actually can play this after king here. Let's say queen g5 check, king f2, not f1. You should keep the keep away from the first rank. And now after rook to f8, now you hide king to e1, not king e2. If king e2, you're getting mated. After queen g2 check, king e3, now comes queen f2 check here, and queen f4 is mate. So you have to go to e1, and then finally after queen g3 check, you're gonna go king to d2, rook f2 check, and finally king to c1, and you've escaped everything, and now you can play this game. Where you are just up 2 bishops. But Stanley didn't feel like testing if he could win this, and he wanted to. Well, basically, he lost the previous 4 games, and he didn't want to lose another one, and he wanted at least a draw against Morphy before the match ends. I forgot to mention Charles Henry Stanley also took part in the first American Chess Congress, but he was eliminated in the first round when he played against Liechtenstein, Morphy's opponent, one of Morphy's opponent also from the first American Chess Congress. And here, before I forget, we already mentioned in the previous video that Morphy did not accept any cash prizes, and here the prize for the match, well, the stakes were $100 each. So Morphy, of course, he won the match, but he refused the money. So instead, he gave the money he won. He sent it to Stanley's wife, to Mrs. Stanley, and he didn't give it to him. He gave it to his wife because, well, as Lawson mentions in his book, Morphy thought that Stanley would just waste it on booze. So instead, he sent it to his wife. Morphy knew that Stanley's wife was pregnant and that she was, you know, due to give birth in some maybe 2 months. And he wanted her to have the money. So he sent her the money, and later Stanley, in honor of Paul Morphy, named his daughter Pauline. So a very nice story. Also one of the reasons why I decided to show this game, to mention that as well. And here I have something very interesting. These are all the games Morphy played during his visit to New York in 1857. So let's just check it out. You can pause the video, print screen it, or save it if you wanna. There are a lot of games. As aside from the first American Chess Congress, he also played a lot of friendly games, a lot of games at odds, a lot of blindfold games. There's also a consultation game. So there you have it. On the left, even games. On the right, games at odds. So for example, you can see that he played on the left against Louis Paulsen. At even games, 8 wins, 1 loss, and 3 draws, like we know from the first American Chess Congress. But then at games at odds, you can see that odds QN. I believe that's Queen's Knight. So he gave him odds of a knight. Morphy was still able to win 17 games against Paulsen, lose 9 and draw 3 at the odds of a knight. That's pretty crazy. But yeah, that's just in case you want to check that out. And also you can see that there's the match on the left also. Where is it? Morphy versus Schulten. 24 games were played, 23 wins by Morphy, and the 24th game was lost by Morphy. Probably again, just intoxicated by the 23-0. Morphy had to mess something up, as he usually does. But yeah, that's also one of the things I wanted to show you guys. So we are finished with New York. Morphy spent there some 3.5 months, and he decides now to go back to New Orleans, and we are going to continue our story from there in the next video. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Once again, congratulations to everyone who found that forced mate in 5. I would like to thank Barry McMurdoch, Ulrich Laja, Tazo Sarampatsis, Julian Boisvert, and Ruben Barbeles for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Morphy saga, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and of course, whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Sunday.